Hello, everyone.
Very
Welcome to
nice.
the seminar. We're going to be talking about a new concept, which is frankly in its very early stages, that we're calling communities or DeSci communities. Um, the goal for the seminar is to present that early conceptualization through a product prototype, discuss the motivation behind a community, and thinking also about things like its engagement model with some of the publishing primitives that we have, like research objects and attestations and annotations and stuff that we've discussed before. And then there's also this maybe thorny concept of a curation signal that might become another like good-heartable metric in science if we don't do it right. So that's, yeah, at a high level, what we um, are going to discuss today.
Andre,
So
could you share this Figma? Is it open for us to comment on?
oh, and I've shared it in yeah, I've shared it in the chat. It should
I
be.
cannot see it in the chat.
Oh, I see. I think it's if I give me a second. Yeah.
Sweet, thank you.
Actually, if everybody could join this now, I think it would make it much easier because I could do the you could follow my camera.
Spotlighting thing.
Sorry?
Spotlighting thing.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Ellie, could you also just click on just there's a link to a prototype below on Figma. Could you just see if that's working?
Yeah, for sure.
Could you quickly just repost the link? Sorry about that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's working for me. Also, the prototype link.
Okay. One sec. Let's figure out how to use Zoom. Everybody see the link now? It should be in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm all set.
Yeah. Cool. It looks like everyone is here. Okay. So I'm going to start with a brief problem decomposition, just thinking about the main design problems and design questions behind communities. Then I'll take you through a product tour for Attestations V1. This is something that we'll be presenting at East Denver, actually. And finally, we're going to take a step back and take a look at those concepts that the prototype expresses and see if we can like critique and improve them through like a free-form discussion. Okay, problem decomposition. So where we are right now with the nodes product is here at the individual level. We have an interface to create and incrementally publish research objects on the Codex protocol. So if you want to bundle together your code, your papers, and your data, and then version them, you can do that. The problem is that right now, you don't have a reason to do that in the first place. And that's at the root of what communities, and also this piece about attestations and annotations that we've been talking about for a while. That's what this whole piece of a social layer around this individual level of just publishing research objects is about. We're aiming to create a social layer to curate, validate, and incentivize the creation of research objects. Okay, I'm gonna now take you through a product tour of the first version of communities that hopefully accomplish these things. For
As a
context,
quick
yeah.
note, Philip's hand is raised.
Oh, yes,
Yeah, so just quick comment. So what we now call communities, I think this is most closely related to what we originally called ARCs, right? So autonomous research communities that basically do validation and curation. So I just wanted to flag that because like we didn't talk about that for a long time, but now it feels like that we actually found a really nice way to integrate that directly into the app.
Yeah.
And I also just side comment. So when we say communities, I think this should definitely also include traditional journals, because that's what they typically do. They wouldn't call themselves communities, but that's their job. And this is where they would do it in our app.
Yes. Ideally, and this is something we're going to talk about in the concept discussion and what I wrote here already. Like the definition for a community as a primitive should be flexible enough to encompass things like journals, but they could also encompass things like standards bodies or just like citizen science watch groups.
Exactly. Perfect. Cool. So on the same page.
Okay. To preface the product tour, imagine that you're Megan Ansel. She's a NASA researcher, and she's published a node called Exploring Lupus Clouds. It's in the like astrophysics field. She's added 3 open attestations by the DeSci Foundation community: open code, open data, and reproducibility. And from her perspective, we're tracking its validation and curation by the DeSci Foundation community in this product tour. Okay, let's. Okay, so this is the landing experience for the DeSci Foundation community. You have a top level description, and this is also V1. We're going to like extend how a community represents themselves, especially from a landing perspective over time. But right now it's just who you are and a rough statement about what you do. So the DeSci Foundation is an independent organization of leading scientists and innovators dedicated to new technologies, incentives, processes, and funding models. From Megan's perspective, this is important because her research has a very high standard of reproducibility. So she publishes detailed code and data artifacts to reproduce all of her tables, figures, on most of the claims that she makes in her paper. And the DeSci Foundation, and sorry for that this placeholder isn't too descriptive, has made 3 attestations to convey their standards. One is open code, one is open data, and one is reproducibility. And so the first thing that you see when you're on the DeSci Foundation feed is something that we call radar. And the idea is that whereas before, and if you consider something like a journal where you submit something and then you wait for a decision, on a community's radar, the community simply expresses entry requirements as attestations. So the moment you publish a node with a set of 3 attestations, open code, open data, and reproducibility, before they're validated, you show up on this feed. So Exploring Lupus Clouds, the thing that Megan published, showed up on the feed. Building Saturn's Moons, credit to Ellie for this name, also showed up on the feed. Another set of nodes also, they just show up on this feed, just given that they've met these entry requirements. And right now they're being expressed as attestations, but then you can imagine that they also extended things like if you publish with a set of keywords, so meta science, you show up on the DeSci Foundation feed. And Philip, you have a question?
Momentary pause. Yeah.
Yeah. So just for clarification, so with the attestations, so like a community, of course, they could say we have these and these and these attestations that we require, but they could also say we have this or this or this. So how do we differentiate between and or?
That's a good question. I think that's an extension of this concept of an entry requirement, like sort of the conditions on the either or and. I think, yeah, it's something we can implement later, essentially, but I think it still speaks to the same idea of, yeah, you can express like what, like you can express under like the terms under which you'd be considered like through these attestations. So it could be like
one thing that's that stands out, Andre, here. Like I'm a scientist, I'm looking at this page. Something I want to see are just keywords of fields of science you're interested in. Because now I see, oh, mechanism design, new models of funding, you know, and I'm like, oh, okay, this resonates, right? This vibes with whatever I'm interested in. So like, ideally in that hierarchy, one of the first thing I see before I need to read like a blob of text is like DeSci Foundation, keyword, meta science, mechanism design, right? And then I want a lot of these, right? I want to like, tell me your scope, right? Tell me your scope. And this is like an important thing. Every journal has a scope, right? Every community has a scope about things they're interested in, right? So like I need to like be able to land there and understand your scope. And then with the scope, that's going to help us provide a suggested feed on that radar, right? Like the scope will allow us, every time we see keywords tagged, and we can even make it in the UI, when you enter a certain keyword, it says, well, that community, right? And that will automatically make it happen on the feed.
Yeah, that's a good point. We could definitely, and I think even in V1, we should extend this section with keywords. Yeah. Actually, this point about like how do you express what the community is trying to do, I think like the first step is through attestations, and I think we're highlighting it right now because it is like a unique primitive that we provide. But yeah, you can extend that with like keywords and things like that. You can even imagine that like the top people in the community are featured at the top, and that could be another incentive to contribute.
Yeah, typically you want to see thing like what's the scope, who are the people involved. Those are like the two most important informations actually.
Exactly.
What is this community about? Is it my community? Is it a community I want to belong with, right? So like I think we need to like understand how we optimally communicate a signal that like, yes, I would like to belong to this community, because ultimately what you're doing is you're striving to impress a given community, right?
Yeah.
So
you're totally right.
So yeah, what's the scope? Why should I try to impress this community, right?
Yeah.
Because in the absence of an impact factor and all this like nonsense metric we have in science right now, those are the two fundamental questions, right? With an impact factor, you don't need to think about it. It's like, oh, I have X, right? But in the absence of it, it's like, why should I be motivated to impress this community, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So another thing is like, what makes you special and interesting? So like, what is your philosophy around scientific curation?
Yeah.
Right? I kind of care about this because with people that go to this in this weird fringe movement that is DeSci are people that are looking for alternatives, right? They're looking for new creative ideas, new like, and they want to know what makes this special, right? So like, what's the scope? Who's part of it, and what makes you special, right?
Yeah.
So maybe that's something about mechanism. Maybe we make even an explicit tab. It's like curation mechanism design, right? And we explain the mechanism design of that community in terms of curation, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, more generally, I think it would be really cool if you guys could just check out the homepages of established journals and just take some inspiration from that. So basically, all of them, they have a journal statement where they have like basic information. They definitely have an aims and scope statement, probably the most important one. They say something about the editors. I think this is also, I mentioned this to Carla, so we will need to have the role of an editor or something equivalent in the attestation workflow at some point.
Yeah.
And more generally, like as a philosophical remark, I mean, journals can be thought of as communities, right? So they're sort of like, they're a place where the community gathers and where they basically get prestige by publishing their work, but it's a community effort. So that's a way to think about a journal.
Yeah, my question always is, how much should we like model off the existing system, and how much should we shed away from the existing system, right? I think that's the perennial question, because at the end, it's all it's a lot of bundling, unbundling happening here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So understanding what are the things that need to stay. I think why should I impress this community is really important. What's the scope of that community? Who's part of that community? Now, whether we call it a journal, an editorial board, or these things, this is up to debate. I think there's someone can come in and call it, oh, we're the journal of DeSci. Fine, that's great, right? And other people could say, hey, we're the fair data community. Like I think we want to maximize expressibility here. Yeah. And finally, understanding what kind of experiment they're running here with curation is interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, what would happen if I submitted my work there? What would happen? What's their curation system like?
I think the fundamental difference between journals or communities as they exist now and here is that the curation is bottom up, and that's what I was going to get at with this radar feed as well, because it's not a feed that's organized around consumption like a Twitter feed or an Instagram feed or whatnot. It's organized around contribution. So, for example, when you see a featured annotation from a leading astrophysicist, Chris Hill, on exploring Lupus clouds, you have a clear call to action to contribute further to this discussion around reproducibility in the form of a vote or a comment. And in making that contribution, it enhances the Exploring Lupus Clouds nodes curation signal to this community. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I have
Yeah,
a
so just
clarification question here. So I thought of the feed that you showed there basically as the outcome of the curation of that community.
yeah, you're thinking of the collection page. Yeah. So there's this is the view. It's important to preface. This is a view for an active community member that's in the community. When you the community landing page actually is a feed of the collection of that community, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was not clear. Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. We should make the copy around this a little bit clearer. Ronan, you have a question as well?
Yes, around this Chris Hill, like annotation.
Sorry, that was me.
How does what roles get displayed on this feed? Like, is this because Chris Hill is one of the curators or active in the community? Like, how are you thinking of that?
Chris Hill over here is a reviewer. So he's someone who's reviewing the I should make that clearer actually. He's a reviewer of the reproducibility attestation on the Exploring Lupus Clouds node. And what it's featuring here is his annotation, almost like how you would feature a tweet in a Twitter feed. So the ways that the calls to action to contribute aren't just here's a paper, review it. It's here's an annotation, like join the discussion. Here's an attestation which needs more votes. Contribute to voting on the attestation. Or here's a node which has requested 3 attestations, like contribute to curating it by voting or commenting on any of these. Yeah.
This is a really powerful idea, and I think this is something that really gives a kind of value add that compared to existing journals. The one thought that I had here, so you have reviewers that you're showing on this feed, but you could also have like another part which is sort of the social layer. This could be just be anyone on social media that has like a comment about the paper, or some maybe some curated subset of communities. But then like what are people saying about the things that are under review or under curation in this journal?
Yeah, so on that topic, I did mention that I think the feed itself should not be a feed from research objects on Codex. The reason for that is that there's a cold start problem. The feed should be essentially at V1, we should have a button that says recommend research to this community, right? Anyone can go and log in with ORCID, recommend research, and just send them a paper. You don't need to be the author. You can just send it out, right? And just as a way to populate a feed of potentially interested things that this community can work on, it is under no obligation to do any of this, right? But it is just a way to populate information, to populate these feeds early on. And we could do this also with what Ronan is working on, right? Like we could have social media information, everything that's like, I think Ronan, you're also working on the NLP side of your project, right? So like imagine if you aggregate, you have like sense making happening, and then you have some NLP classification system that says, well, that sense making is happening around COVID immunotherapy, right? Keyword, right? And that is like flagged, like that is like something that automatically gets pushed to the feed of that community, right? That is like a call to action to do something about it, right?
Right. And one other way to do this, and this is kind of where we're currently with our thinking in the project, is there's social media, and then nano publications are also a very interesting way to do this, because it's kind of a formal way of representing speed posts that have like the semantics as well. So this could tie into some of the it seems like there's some structure around these annotations, and I think nano publications could be a good way to sort of a first pass at getting some of this. So you could have a nano publication that basically something like, suggest for curation or something like that, and let people publish those.
Yeah. So I think like the V1 stripped down version of that is like recommend, and then we'll be recommending. Yeah. And the V2 version of that is like, here's the aggregation of all this social activity and this sense making data. And the V3 version of that is this plus here's all the stuff happening on Codex, because at that point there's people submitting their work organically.
Cool.
Philip, you had a question?
Yeah, so clarification question. So is the feed that is being displayed here, is that at the level of a node or at the level of an attestation of a node? So with the first one, very specifically, so this highlights the reproducibility badge on this particular research object. What if the author has claimed other badges for the same research object? Where would they appear?
Also here. So there's a diversity of types of cards that appear on this feed. So right now it just happens to feature, as an example, an annotation on reproducibility, but then you could equally show an annotation on open code or open
right,
data.
but would it be a separate entrance in that feed, or would it be just one entrance for each node, and then you could navigate through the various attestations that are under review?
Could you rephrase the last bit of your question?
So if several attestations are being claimed, would I see several versions of that popping up in this feed, or would there just be one where I could then see, okay, there are several attestations that I can work on or contribute to?
You would see multiple, but ideally it would be ranked in such a way that it would be like shuffled like across different nodes, so it wouldn't be repetitive, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So this essentially is like to any type of activity. It's like it's like an activity feed of the community, right? So there's two ways to think about it. We can think about it. There's like things you could curate, right? Things on Codex, as I said, that's probably V3. But there's just natural things, the things that you're currently curating, all of the social activity that's happening, all of the issuance of attestations, all of that is essentially presented here as a feed of activity, right? It's like showing the signs of it's creating like engagement signals.
Right. So I mean, yeah. So I can clearly see the advantage of having like several times the same research object pop up here, so that just gives the impression that there is more going on at the beginning. But once you're in a community that is actually really active, where you have a lot of things going on, then I think this can very quickly get very, very confusing.
Oh, definitely. Like you'd need like a combination of a good recommendation and ranking algorithm. But I think that's a scale problem also.
Definitely a scale problem, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one of the main reasons, maybe just to add to this, is like one of the main reasons for having multiple cards relating to the same node is that they have different calls to action. Like you see, like the one that shows the comment, it's like join the discussion, or the one that Andrew is pointing out right now. Like this is, hey, leave your vote on this attestation, right? So all the different types of entries here do try to engage you in a different way. So you may be the type of person who responds to comments or thinks this specific comment is interesting, but maybe you're also the type of person that just wants to vote on attestations. So it's just a matter of diversifying the calls to action in this feed. Just to like emphasize what Andrew was saying in the beginning, to make it about contributing rather than consuming.
I mean, that's really interesting. So what I don't get yet is the meaning of all these various icons here. So how, like,
we haven't nailed the icon design, so let me pause to spell that out. The check mark is a vote of confirmation on an attestation. So when you see 40 check marks on reproducibility, it means 40 people have come and said, I can confirm in some way that this is true. The 13 represents the annotations on reproducibility. And then these reactions over here are just emoji reactions. Ideally, we talked about how we want them to be like epistemic status markers almost. But to differentiate them a little bit. If you're leaving a reaction, it's a lot less like it's very like low commitment, low effort. Like you're not, whereas a vote, eventually you could even stake your reputation on that confirmation, if that makes sense. And lastly, this little green signal thing. This is getting into the curation signal thing, but it's just the sum over the attestation votes. So if exploring lupus clouds, maybe it'll be clearer if I just open.
Yeah, go through it.
Yeah, actually, I should have explained the rest of the feed first, but it's okay. So if you remember from the feed, exploring lupus clouds had 200 signal, like it had 200 of that little green dot. That's the sum across the attestation votes that it's received. So 100 plus 40 plus 60. So it's a way to signal like how much curation activity has happened around that node. That makes sense.
Yeah, so here I think it's important to point out, so this is very preliminary, and ideally, I think our goal is to provide communities the ability to configure what is curation signal for them, right? So what does a community value? What constitutes, it's essentially like, think about like a transparent Twitter algorithm, right? It's like, this is how this number has been computed, and this is something that the community has decided, right? So ideally, we provide good defaults over this. And I think this now gets really down deep into the weeds of mechanism designs and, curation signals. And it's a very complex field, and there's a lot of like challenges around that. Yeah. Ultimately, this is something also we could put up prizes, right? We could have a prize for a research object that comes up with a clever way, or clever paths to like think about curation signals, right? Because ultimately, and I think there's we want to be able to, somehow aggregate signals of curation without making a blanket statement that A is better than B, all right? So it shouldn't be something that is making too much of a value judgment, right? Because a lot of things could come into curation signals, which could be like negative, right? Yeah. So it's essentially like we have to think about it as like perhaps even like a marker of activities, like what is engaging the community right now, right? What is like creating a type of excitement, right? So like there's different ways to think about it. I think it's a really interesting design space, and there's many open questions.
Yeah, I want to speak to what this very simplistic idea of a curation signal is doing right now in this feed. And remember, the curation signal is just the sum over attestation votes. So in the example of exploring lupus clouds, there's 200 votes, you get 200 signal. In the case of building Saturn's moons, there's just 2 signal. So of the 3 attestations received, maybe only 1 or 2 of them have been voted on. And so like just with the like red, yellow, green, like traffic light system almost, it's another way to signal to the community that like this is what needs attention, right? Like this is what hasn't even like crossed the threshold of being looked at or being considered as valid research. So like come and check it out. So that's what makes it useful as an aggregation metric. Yeah.
Okay,
so here it's almost a reverse indicator to where you're talking about it, right? It's like the less curation signal, the more it should come up to the attention of a community to reach sufficient curation signal to say yes.
Yeah.
I think there could be like, I think so like the problem with this, one of the challenges with that is actually what is the way to create engagement and sense making around science in an optimal fashion? Is it by focusing on the weak link or focusing on the strong links, right? Like where do you want to ultimately funnel the attention of a community? So the strong links are like the extraordinary discoveries that are like buzzing. The weak links are the one nobody really cares about, nobody wants to deal with, and they're just looking at it and like, no, I don't want to comment on this, right? So like these things will like feature on top of those feeds. So yeah, just some food for thoughts. We have to think about.
I want to qualify that a little bit, because remember that the way that you can contribute to curation here is very different from curation in like the journal submission system in peer review. Whereas there, you have to wait to get assigned something and then you write a really long report. Here, the way that you can contribute is all the way from a stigmergic mark like an emoji to a vote to a comment. Like there's just a huge spectrum from really low effort to like really high effort, and maybe where you can even stake your reputation. So yeah, I think, yeah, sorry. Philip, you have a question?
Yeah, so I mean, this is actually very helpful, this last qualification. So my impression from looking at this is that the system is designed right now as having very low hurdles for engagement, but also very little depth, right? So I was just wondering, so one of my questions was, so how do we get from a Twitter, like, you know, very casual, like, yeah, thumbs up, thumbs down, whatever, to a system where people actually exert effort to like, you know, check these attestations and like do a proper peer review?
Yeah. I don't think that there's very little depth. I think there's an opportunity to have very little depth. So like the emoji thing is, I agree. It's like, yeah, it's very little depth. But then when you get into like voting with comments attached, so voting with the justification in comments and that being like mandatory, then it's like a step further. But a step further from that, we can imagine, is that you in the case of a protected attestation, you are assigned to be the reviewer, and then you have to stake your reputation on the vote or on issuing the attestation. The design principle is to go from like as little to as much and like spread that out. Yeah.
I mean,
And yeah, Philip, your question, like the official, you know, classical peer review is vote plus comment, right? So you can do a peer review as a vote plus comment,
sure,
right?
I mean, so
so this is what a peer review is.
Incentivizing engagement, this flexibility actually creates a bit of a conundrum, right? So, like, because yes, you want to have some sort of like early signals that sort of release dopamine signals and like, you know, engagement, blah blah blah. But you definitely wouldn't want to hand out tokens to people who just vote on shit, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So remember, we are enabling communities to do this incentives layer, right, on their own, right? So like our goal is to provide them tools to be able to decide what they want to reward. There might be a community that wants to reward, you know, silly, you know, or like low effort epistemic markers, and who knows, might have a lot of value right down the line. Other communities don't do that, right? The question I think here is, like you're saying, in the case of DeSci Foundation
layer, right? So I mean, the
so
question is, what would be it?
Yeah, so you're thinking about DeSci Foundation, right? Like
no, I'm thinking about our token. I mean, yes, ultimately DeSci Foundation, but it would be much wider than that.
Yeah, I think it's early for this. I think this will have to do with the value of data over the network as a mechanism to reward communities. So I think that's one layer above.
Now, I think, okay, so let's discuss this tomorrow, but I do see challenges here. So this is it's not immediately clear to me how you can incentivize meaningful, high quality engagement with a system that is that flexible.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I actually wanted to discuss in the discussion section of the seminar. One claim I'm going to make is that while there is like this, like many possible ways to contribute, on a range from like very low effort to very high effort, like the high effort stuff, so vote plus comment is more valuable / has higher signal than an emoji. And so we can almost like weight those contributions higher. And we could weight, and this ties into the curation signal discussion, but we could weight the signal of a comment much higher than a vote. And we could weight the signal, the curation signal of a vote and a comment higher than a vote alone. Like that goes to the, if that makes sense.
I mean, okay, so this is food for thought for later, but I think at the beginning, the major problem here is, I mean, if I just look at your design here, so you have like 200 votes for this and that, I think this is, I mean, this would be fantastic if we would get that, but like, just to be very, very clear, at the beginning, we will have almost no interaction whatsoever. And the number one problem that, curation communities face is to find people who actually want to do the curation and validation, right? So this is the main problem. So
yeah, but then I want to like qualify that as well, in that you're asking someone to spend hours of their time writing a manuscript and not get paid to do so. That's what peer review is. But here what we're saying is, and a peer review also is, it's a bundle of attestations, right? Whereas here, like to check open data, you don't need hours in any case, right? You just need minutes. And so I think the assignment problem is slightly different because the medium for validation is different as well. I do think that there are some attestations which you can design that are more involved and take a while. And those ones are naturally the ones that you would expect people to pay for, or you would want to peer review.
Yeah, and there will be attestations that will be done completely by AIs, right? Like plagiarism check, image manipulation check, right?
Yeah.
So
you have to view them from this like expanded design space of mechanism design that we keep like talking about. Because there'll be some which ideally you can just automate, like the check for image manipulation one. Like hypothetically, you could write an agent that does that for you.
Right.
And that's fully automated.
Yeah.
But then the like big if true is my favorite example because it's like contentious and it's such a nice like grounds for debate and discussion. And it doesn't matter if that's true or not. It's just a grounds for discussion. So I think that, I think it's
this is like social continuum, right? There's some classes of attestations like plagiarism, image manipulation. They do not invite a lot of social discourse, right? You might write, oh, the algorithm is misfiring. This image is not, I'm a type 2 error. You might go in and like complain about being a type 2 error, right? But there's not much ground for conversations, whereas something like big if true, it's like, well, what do you mean big if true? I'll tell you what's big if true. And people have opinions about it. Yes, Ronan, you've been raising your hands for some time now.
I also wrote this in the chat, but I just thought about the sort of parallel on GitHub where you have, pull requests, and they're quite an efficient way of more concretely kind of denoting contributions. And it seems like there's almost a parallel here in terms of, like an emoji reaction is not going to be a pull request. That doesn't do anything. But if you're suggesting some citation or you're suggesting something bigger, like a code, modification or something like that, then those things can start being recognized and formally incorporated into the paper.
Yeah, this is somewhere on our roadmap, Ronan, the whole fork and merge and pull request of DeSci nodes. Yes, okay. I totally agree with you. Yes, it's question is what comes first, and I think this kind of basic community layer is going to come first.
Yeah. And then through the community, I imagine you could even find like a collaborator who would end up doing the pull request, which is why I think the social,
request for feedback, very valuable.
Yeah, and I think this again, it gets at the idea that review doesn't necessarily have to be adversarial. Sometimes review is just really constructive. You're finding someone that's helping you make your code better, just making your paper better. So it's a whole different sort of spin on what review is. Yep.
Like an attestation is
Do you want to continue guiding us through the full experience? We've been relentlessly interrupting you.
Yeah, we're about 20% of the way through, and I thought this would be a 5-minute. Okay.
We won't talk.
Right, I'm just going to take you through what it looks like. To summarize, Radar gives you like there's 3 different ways to enter a node, and they're all oriented around contribution. I'll just go from like the open a node experience. So this is like the landing experience for exploring Lupus clouds. You have like authors, pin components, the attestations which they requested. So remember, it's open data, reproducibility, and open code. In the top, we actually simplified the UI significantly also to emphasize that, the Figma UI is, to emphasize attestations being playing a central role in creating your node. So when you open the sidebar, you see the issued attestations. So open data reproducibility, open data reproducibility, and that's meant to say open code, sorry. You see the votes, and then you see the comments that were made on them. Let me show you, and let's just say you navigate to the manuscript. The first, and I think this is about on par with the emojis in terms of the cost of making the mark. Anytime you leave, so first of all, any component on nodes is highlightable, either as like a text highlight or a box highlight. And this like toolbar for making highlights is going to be persistent. So anytime somebody makes a highlight, even if it's not connected to a comment, it'll be left on their paper. It could be used to like signal this is interesting, or to just say like I was here, but it's just another sort of cue that there's like a social experience happening on top of this.
Yeah, so imagine highlights as stigmergic marks, right? It drives your attention to what's interesting.
Yes.
But
And I
this,
don't know.
okay, so this is this is without the consent of the authors, that basically anybody can come in and leave graffiti on your paper.
Yeah.
I think this is a big mistake.
I don't. Okay, we can throw it out. I don't know if
Yeah.
I would call it graffiti though. Yeah.
Like if you have this functionality, people will use it in a way that really pisses authors off.
Okay.
That's a sure way to make sure that nobody actually puts content on here.
Okay.
Are you sure, Philip? Because hypothesis already has this function kind of today, and there's the problem is not enough, I think.
I mean, if this is supposed to be the official version of the scientific record, the last thing I want on there is some kid pissing on my paper.
But it's not pissing. It's just a highlight, right? Like, what does
I mean, people are going to use it for so many things that are going to piss off authors. So I think this is very problematic. This is also one of the comments that we got in the attestation seminar. So basically any sort of like publicly visible statement or opinion about your paper that is without the consent of the authors is something that authors are allergic against. So this is what we heard from Richard Sever and from people at bioRxiv. So this is like, yeah.
I don't think I understand. Yeah, I mean, I guess this is something we can discuss later too.
I mean, it's one thing if
Yeah, the question is, how do you do a
this?
review without being able to highlight or connect things, right? So it's and this, remember, we had the fork and merge concept at the very beginning that said the version remains untouched, and then there's a forked version which is full of stuff, right?
There's also the concept, like the way we're thinking about it right now is to basically very strongly encourage any comments to be specifically tied to certain attestations, right? So only once you've requested the open data or reproducibility attestation, only then can people go in and comment on this attestation. And if they don't, like, there is a way to leave a comment without targeting a specific attestation, but essentially by like scoping comments to attestations, so scoping them to a certain topic of discussion, we give authors the chance to kind of guide the discussion on their paper, and attestations eventually can be designed in a way that they can have permissioning around like who gets to comment on this, right? So that's all open design space, I guess. But yeah, this concept of totally tying comments to attestations is a way of giving authors more agency about like where do people get to comment and what should the discussion be about. So you can imagine like an attestation like, hey, open discussion, just share your thoughts, but you could also just very strongly guide the discussion on your paper and also scope it to limited people who you want to comment on your paper.
Right. So I mean,
yeah, another point, Philip, is that it's there's a consent model in this. If an author does not select any attestation, you cannot make annotations on it, because annotations are linked to attestations as a mechanism to support the validation process of an attestation.
Yeah.
I think more importantly, there needs to be consent model around like what is being publicly displayed about the discourse around an attestation. So this is the old question in the journal publishing industry, like whether authors and referees are comfortable with public comments or not. And the vast majority of cases, neither authors nor referees are comfortable with that. So there needs to be, this absolutely needs to be baked in. There needs to be mutual consent from both parties, whether this part of their conversation will be publicly visible or not. This is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. Well, we've thought about that as an attestation parameter already. So when you create an attestation, like even anonymizing, I do want to also ask if like this is conditioned on whether their identities are revealed or not. Like
like partially, right? But there is, I mean, there actually, this is two different things, right? So the author's identity will obviously be revealed, but the referee is not necessarily. But I think there is also, like, separately from that, some referees just do not feel comfortable that their reports are publicly available, and some authors actually feel pretty strongly that they don't want certain comments or referee reports publicly available because they're either shit or they're embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, I think
so. In that case, I think you don't select any open attestations, right? So any attestation that is open for public discourse that engages your responsibility as an author. Let's say you claim you have open data, and then you say, well, I don't want any comments whatsoever about the openness of my data. That doesn't work, right? You cannot make a claim around the openness of the data by saying, well, nobody's allowed to leave a public comment about whether I did it or not, right? So you would need to go and pick like a restricted attestation class that says, I don't know, like Nature open data. And it would have a policy that says all reviews around Nature open data are private. And it would have a anonymous policy. It's like the identities of the reviewers are unknown and the annotations are private and nobody can read them, right? So that is like, that's how we're thinking. The question is, what do I start with, right? What is the beginning, right? Within that space. And, you know, the way we're thinking about it is we're going to start with open attestations. But we could also start with reserved attestations.
Sense, like from a product development perspective, I get that. I'm just concerned that from the very beginning that this will give us a lot of problems. So if we don't have like a consent model baked in right from the get-go, I think this will probably turn off a lot of people that came into this with, you know, with curiosity and an open mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, that's a fair point. I think we want to make sure that we encourage positive interactions, right? Mm-hmm. Which is difficult.
Yeah.
Just maybe one comment on this. Yes, I agree. I think consent model is super important. Just based on the conversations that I'm having with our users or people who are interested in using and testing the app, these do tend to be people who are very interested in like open exchange and who would wish for people to just comment on their papers so they get feedback. I do agree, like it's super important for most researchers, but I also feel that our early adopters are probably the type of people that are actually curious about exactly this or stuff like this. So yeah, I do think we need a mechanism for it. I don't know if it needs to be there from the get-go.
Yeah. Oh, and another thing also is that like existing social practices in science around closed review can coexist around new standards that in science that are more open and more auditable and stuff. Because attestations, the way you define them, give you that flexibility. And the norms will emerge at the community level. We just have to let them play out. Like some communities.
So my only point is we need to have that option baked in right from the beginning. And then
definitely, yeah.
What communities implement at the beginning and what authors choose and referees choose, this should be and must be up to them.
Yeah.
But we need to have the possibility for people to opt out and to say, no, I don't want that. Or yes, I value these conversations, but I do not want them to be public.
Yeah, the author always is in control, right? Like you initiate, and like an attestation doesn't just come to you. Like the publication, like it's centered around the author making decisions about like requesting an attestation, for example. So yeah, like if they request something that they know full well may lead to like, I don't know, I don't ever want to call it graffiti also because it's tied to researcher profiles and that could be a stipulation as well. They can only comment if you have an ORCID account that's linked. So there's some reputation at stake. But yeah, I think overall, with attestations, this is possible. Like you can have a closed review and that is an auditable alongside one that's completely open and auditable. Yeah.
Hey, I do not think we should over-index on the closed review stuff, though.
I think so.
I do think that there's quite a significant, the thing is we might want to we have to pick carefully what we copy and what we change from the existing way of doing things. The question is, what's the sensible starting point? And I feel the sensible starting point is open and low engagement intensity. Now that could be a wrong choice.
We have
right?
no idea about this, right? So we didn't study this systematically, but my gut feeling is exactly the opposite. I think that the moment that you start open, you will attract a lot of noise that will just scare off people that serious scientists. So that would be my hypothesis. Shit spotter is an example.
Yeah,
sorry.
No. So you can you continue the demo? I think there was something else there, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I realized it. Give me a second.
So yeah, the other reason for open and low intensity interactions is to get communities to use the system early on that are not as hard to get as these existing entrenched scientific communities. So so that there's also path dependency here. So let's put it this way. I think it really depends on the hypothesis we have on the engagement model around the community layer, right? So how do we provide value to these DeSci communities? What's the most valuable first step to provide them value, right? And my hunch here is that it has to do with people that love science, that are not necessarily all of them professional in it, but they want to send signals that they appreciate the work of other scientists that are adding to the type of topics that they care about in the DeSci space, right? So these would be low, essentially positive signals, right? There's no thumbs down, there's only thumbs up, right? It's a count over positive signals. And it's a low intensity engagement model that goes all the way to high intensity engagement model. Let's say if we would map like a chart and we had on one side DeSci communities and on the other end traditional Elsevier journals, right? We would be very much optimizing over here rather than over there. And that's again, that's a question, right? That's a question of prioritization. But yeah, I mean, it's a great topic of inquiry.
I mean, so
I don't know what's the right answer.
My hypothesis is that the lower the threshold for interacting and the lower the threshold for validation and curation, the lower the quality that you're going to get, both in terms of the actual curation validation, but also in terms of the content that people will post on the platform in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's another thing. Should we constrain it to be high, to require high energy? Because we can constrain a design space to require high engagement. Let's say we can make an interface or we can make a product that calls for spending 2 hours next to it to do something as the minimal engagement level, right? We could do a cutoff. It's possible. Just
to be clear, so this is not what I'm suggesting. I'm just saying that we need to have the option from the beginning, and that both the communities and the authors need to mutually consent on what type of interactions they actually want and what type of interactions they want to be visible publicly.
So yeah, just to be clear, this is something that's linked to the attestation. So if you do not select an attestation that's open, you do not invite commentary. So if you make a claim to the world about your data being open, you invite commentary. So that's the idea here. So we remove the ability to add comments on anything. Comments are always grounded in attestations.
Yep.
Attestations are the support for social interactions you could think of, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's
they're
the main...
also the embedded consent model.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to help visualize that, Philip, like, do you see this untagged comment section?
Yeah.
If somebody posts a comment that is not tied to one of these like topics, it maybe like the author is the like has like none of this will be visible to the public, and the author could just like, yeah, the author could either, you know, like tag those untagged comments with an attestation if they're relevant, or they just sit in like this like ghost inbox basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so this is going to require a lot of like explanation to potential users, right? So like, let's say we have an open batch for open data, and we have like a reserved or like whatever, a protected one. So how do you like even communicate what the difference between these two is? That's not trivial.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking right now. We've started thinking about that with like, do you see how there's like this locked and unlocked thing?
Yeah.
So sorry, there should have been a hover state here that when you hover over it says like open and then describes like what being an open attestation means. And we'll think about like those visual cues. But then there's also this like self-assigned by author, which I should have also like prototyped. But then like when you open it, it says, like this attestation relies on the community to vote on it to validate the claim that it's reproducible, for example. So just like clear signaling, which is even why there's like a warning label about
Yeah, that's good.
Which was, I think, your feedback, I think, when you went with Carla, which I think was a really good suggestion too, like how to make this like super clear.
And also, if you go back, Andre, to the where to have the suggested attestations as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, just there's.
One sec, sorry, I put the wire.
Yeah, exactly. So here, if there, so like these are basically all open attestations, but if there was a protected one, then instead of just being as an author, instead of just being able to claim, that call to action would say request. So that immediately tells me just how I request, like, okay, somebody needs to actually give this to me. So yeah, that example isn't in there, but essentially that's what protected attestations look like.
Yeah. So differences in like, so we'll have like visual cues, but also differences in copy. Like we'll work on those over time. We just deprioritized that for V1 because that relies on having an attestation manager. And it's like a workflow thing as well, right? Like when you request, then you need like a notification at least, and then stuff like that.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about conceptually. So we have a number of like overlapping, but not completely subsumed concepts, like open versus reserved, verified versus verifiable. There's a lot of, you know, we have to think very carefully about the copy here and how we communicate this and what's our conceptualization around it, right? Is there a case where an open attestation, which is essentially the author's making a verifiable claim, now transforms into a verified claim, right? Imagine you have, 1,000 confirmation signals. It still remains a verifiable claim, but people have done a lot of work around it to like verify it, right?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Is there a new attestation that's issued, which is a request and verified claim data is open? How is that represented at the data model level? Are these two is this new attestation given because there was a previous verifiable claim that has now turned verified? Or is it a parameter of the attestation that an attestation can turn into a verified claim, after a sufficient period of activity or things, like let's say the community administrator turning it to verified, right? I think these are like the types of conceptualization that need to come from the product first.
Yeah.
Because it's really about it's really design guided, right? More than it is back-end guided. Whatever's on the back-end data modeling, we will figure it out, but it's a product, it's a design question, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I do see it as like another attestation parameter. Like you could imagine that there's like you wait for a certain number of votes, for example. Like you have to hit 24 votes for it to turn verified. I don't know, things like that, but yeah.
Yeah, so like the thing with votes, so I think we're not gonna have a lot of votes. So I also think that there's vote and vote, right? There's a lot of different level of effort that's expanded into voting on something. One of the problem a priori is that we cannot measure what is a vote that has requested a lot of effort and through verification versus what is a flimsy, low effort, or even misleading vote, right? So just that to say that votes don't really add up as nicely as low effort stigmergic marks like a thumbs up, I like this, right? Which has this nice capacity to be, to be representing a preference, right? And just adds up nicely. A vote over something that's high effort is a much more murky thing to aggregate.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Also, that was the product tour. So.
Oh, I have another call. Thanks a lot, Andrew. This is really cool.
Okay.
I'm jumping, and you guys keep going on, and I'll be back.
Okay.
See you.
Yeah. 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 Also, if anybody wants to leave like comments on the Figma for feedback, I'll link that as well in the chat. That would be great. Should we stop here since people are bouncing, or does anybody want to?
Yeah, it looks like a couple of people are bouncing.
I could get going, but could keep going. I absolutely love
Yeah,
this.
you guys should continue. Philip and Andre, you should continue the conversation here. Philip, this needs to be passed on to the dev ASAP. So it's important that you get fully in the loop around all of this. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm off. See you.
Fine.
Well, if I could pick your brain in so many ways, I don't know what a good topic to start on would be. Like, is there anything that has piqued your interest and we could start with? Or
I mean, okay, so I think now what we've done during the seminar is we looked at the community perspective on this, right? So the radar and what the community members would see, what is going on.
Yeah.
I wonder, so what does it look like for the normal like visitor to a DeSci node? What is their experience?
Yeah. So this is what a normal visitor would see as well in the case of open attestations. I think it's like if you're a member, it just unlocks like another layer to the permission model. So if you're a member, then you would see nodes that have like reserved attestations as well on this feed. So this is actually like the landing experience for like visitors as well, which I think is a good thing. Yeah.
Okay, wait. So if I'm just a normal person and I'm not a member of anything, it's my first time that I come here, and then I click on DeSci Foundation, and then I see this radar and all these nodes that require input.
Yeah.
That is not the experience that I would expect as somebody who wants to see well curated research.
Yeah, that's what we would. So that's the curated by DeSci Foundation tab would be for. Yeah, it would be this.
All right. So what's the difference? So I don't get the difference here between this curated view and like this landing view. So why am I not landing on the curated view?
Yeah, actually, if you're not authenticated as and I guess we could feature curated by DeSci Foundation, but this is actually, we were discussing this yesterday and we weren't sure what to focus on also, like what should be the default. But the difference is that on Radar, it's just, it's like unvalidated research will show up. Whereas on curated by, it's research that has been validated.
Right. So honestly, I think like for the default, that should be it. So like if I want to dive deeper as a as a visitor to the node site and see what is going on and maybe engage more, then fine. But primarily, I mean, the point of these curation communities is that they should curate stuff for me that that is actually valuable. So that I'm actually thinking that so these curation feeds, they could become like very similar to good journals or good playlists on Spotify. They could become very popular if they're curated the right way, right? So there could be a lot of value that people or organizations create by just curating research in a way that is just really attractive to people who go there.
Yeah, I think so. No, that's a good.
And you want to see the final product and not like the work, right?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I think we should make this the default. Yeah. So this would be the default, and then so this shouldn't be.
And also, so if this is the default, then actually what I would love to see in like so where you currently have radar, I would actually like to see. So if I think of what is a curated view that I would really enjoy. So I would want to have at the top actually featured research objects and then a feed of everything else, right? So this is sort of like, this would be a way for a community to highlight things that they're particularly proud of, or that, they may have different standards of like, what is the difference between normal feed and the featured section. But I think there needs to be a difference, right? So let me give you 2 examples of that. So one would be a journal or a curation community that basically shows everything that people have submitted to them, or that they have pinned them on or whatever. And then the featured section is only for that, where the community says, well, yes, so these are the research objects that meet all our requirements, right?
Yeah.
And then there is the rest that meet maybe 1 or 2, but not all of them, or maybe it just shows everything that has been pinned.
Yeah.
And then you can think of like traditional journals, they would only have in their feed like articles that fulfill all their publication requirements, but then they also typically have featured ones where they know that they attract a lot of engagement, right?
Yeah. So it seems like, so right now we have a purely bottom-up way of curation, but we want something that like on top of the bottom-up curation mechanism, you do want like editors to still be able to like collect things into like a little collection.
Exactly.
And you can call it like editor's pick, or even, or just to recreate a journal, you could say like issue 5.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like a mix between both top-down and bottom-up selection.
Yeah. And then, so communities can decide if they actually want to have a featured section or not, or they can decide like what are the criteria. But having that possibility, I think, is extremely valuable. So both for the community that is doing the curation, as well as for the reader and for the authors.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Yeah, I think that would be, I don't think we can do that for V1, but it seems like a really nice next step.
Right.
Like emphasizes how like the power of like hosting on nodes or creating a community on nodes, and that you get a mix of like top-down and bottom-up selections.
Yeah. And so one more question, like this is just purely conceptual. So in our model, would it be possible that the same research node is being shown or featured in several different feeds?
Yes, that was okay. So that was one implication I wanted to stress.
Yes.
Because if you think about it, like one implication of the journal submission model, so especially because of its long cycles, is that you typically publish in one place, right? Or you're curated in one place.
Yeah.
But the research but with the like incremental publishing model around research objects, you can like pick attestations from all over.
Right. Exactly.
And then you could also like pick, and then going back to this like entry requirements thing, you could also like orient your research and your like research process around like earning a community's attestations. So what that means is, let's just say that the same research object could show up on like multiple different communities, and it could get curated in multiple different places. So yeah, so the exploring lupus clouds could show up in the Journal of Reproducible Research or the DeSci reproducibility community.
Right.
And then also in the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. And it could just be, but then the thing is here, like it's not just going to be journals. You could be curated in like a reading group. Like people could just form a reading group around just telescope.
This makes perfect sense. It does raise a couple of like tricky questions also. For example, with open access journals, you typically do not hand over your copyright to that journal, right? So in principle, this is totally okay. So you can post your stuff elsewhere. But I think there would still be a problem if you actually want to publish the same article in several different journals, because then that particular contribution you made to the scientific record would actually be counted more than once. And that would be a clear case of cheating the system.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
We don't want that, right?
Wait, I'm not sure I actually understand that point. Like, how is it cheating the system if you publish?
Well, it's because let's say you have one paper and you publish it 10 times in 10 different journals, then basically the scientific indexers, they would count 10 different publications.
No, but it would have one identifier, right?
In our system, but not in the traditional system.
Oh, I see. Because you would have like multiple DOIs for the same.
Exactly. Because every journal would assign you a DOI and enter your paper in Crossref, and Crossref would then all the indexes, they get their data from Crossref, and then they would count, this person actually has 10 publications. So if you don't check that they're all the same, you actually walk away with a totally different, wrong conclusion.
Right. But then, yeah.
So this is something that we will have to think about if we actually want journals to use our system. So this is this problem has to be solved, 100%.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, this is also like leverage for us to get with indexers, right? Like if we can show that people are using this thing in a certain way and it's a common identifier that allows people to be curated in different places, and hey, people are already using it. Let's just say like 1,000 people have already published this way, then that's leverage to be considered. Like eventually we do want indexers to take us as seriously as an alternative to the DOI system, right? Also.
Yeah.
And I don't think the solution
is not going to happen anytime soon.
Okay. Yeah.
For sure not.
Yeah.
We can try though.
We can try.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, so the solution would probably be that in our system, the same research object can appear in different curated lists that people have. But somehow there needs to be a way for us to say that if like one of these curated lists is an actual journal, and they make an entrance into Crossref, that this is the version of record, that nobody else can do that after that. So like with our system, we will not make the version of record go away, and it actually, like, the version of record is incredibly valuable to scientists, so they don't even want that to go away. Yeah, because that's literally how their how their career progress is being measured and evaluated. So if it's not a version of record, then it's worthless to them. Yeah. So I'm not really sure how we're going to do that, but yeah, this is definitely something to think about. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe in our system, we could have sort of like a meta, some sort of metadata that identifies communities. There could be a metadata tag that says this is a journal. So if you actually get selected by this community, they will they will create a DOI and they will write it into Crossref. And then after that has happened, no other community that is a journal can actually do the same thing. But others that are not journals, such as, reading groups or just, curation groups that just want to feature research that has certain attributes or is in a particular field, independent from where it's actually published elsewhere, they can still show it in their feed. Maybe it's something like that. Or we need a difference for the curation community in terms of like some sort of classification of curation communities. So if they're actually journals or not.
This is. I think we need to think a little bit, like we need a better theory of change, so to speak, in terms of, because we are like the DPID protocol is a replacement to the DOI in many ways, but then, and it's superior. And I wonder, like, if we go, like, how do we get from here where there are no DPIDs to one where it becomes a standard while we're competing? Like, does that make sense? Like, while we're competing with the DOI system?
The answer is obvious. It's backward compatibility. And that's what I'm talking about here, right? So we need to design a system that is backward compatible with the legacy system that everybody is using at the moment. If that's not the case, we have a problem.
Do you have any writing on this backward compatibility strategy?
No, it's just like it's very similar to so Blu-ray, one of the success factors was that they could also read DVDs, right? So it's backward compatible in that sense. And like DPIDs in our system needs to be exactly the same thing. So it needs to be like, yes, it has all these cool new features, but it needs to work with the existing system. Otherwise, people will not start using it because the existing system dominates everything in academia.
Yeah, I will say that at least in our product discussions, we haven't been thinking about this enough then, like how to make it part of the product experience, both on an individual level. So like, what does creating a node look like if it's been issued a DOI already?
Yeah.
Versus, yeah, I think we need to do some like strategic thinking there.
Yeah, so I mean, so this is actually a pretty relevant point that at some point we'll have to tackle. So the question, like how can we actually get indexed by the existing system? And the answer is only through DOIs, right? So we do need to have DOIs, otherwise the stuff that is being published on our site will never actually make it into the official scientific record that everybody's looking at. So, and I think on a technical level, if I understood it correctly, we already have at least an idea of how this could be done, which is that DOIs can serve as an alias for a DPID.
Right.
So the idea is sort of like that you have these beautiful DPIDs, and then on the version of record, you can just slap a DOI on top of it, and that gets indexed.
Yeah.
But like, I don't think that we've actually built this out yet, but this is the entire, like, I know that people have been thinking about it to some extent. I know that Chris has been thinking about it, Sina and Edward, but like in terms of product design, we also need to think about this backward compatibility.
Yeah. Like one part of this backward compatibility thing is like, if you want to like republish existing work as a node and making that really seamless. Like say you want to like republish a paper, so you inherit the DOI, but then you want to add artifacts to it.
Exactly.
And I think that is a very different onboarding experience than upload your code and data, which can be like, which fundamentally is painful. Like even if it's the most well-designed thing, it's still like painful, as opposed to like if you could just paste a DOI and then it queries Crossref and then like creates a stub for all the metadata and all your artifacts, and then you just have to like replace things that have been already like. Does that make sense? So like you input a DOI of papers that you've already published, and then because you've already submitted that metadata, it pre-fills all the metadata for you. And you can just re-upload the artifacts and like assign them to that.
Exactly.
That's a very different.
So this is this idea of like upgrade your DOI, right? So which I think is actually like, this is potentially really powerful. Like if there would be a bulk way for us to sort of like get the metadata that already exists for a DOI, and then just upload, like already populate the node with that metadata and with the publicly available manuscript, then I I mean, this would be
Yeah,
incredible.
no, that's what Crossref, they have an open API as well. That's exactly what it's for. So you just have to input the DOI and you should be able to get back
Yeah.
everything.
And I mean, this is also how it will work to some extent with the bioarchive pilot, right? So we're talking to Richard Sever about this, and they're actually really excited about making this happen. So the idea would be that, you know, authors who submit their work to bioarchive, that in the submission workflow, that they get the option to say, well, I also want to post that on a DeSci node. So if that happens, what we would have is basically a manuscript that already has a DOI, and where authors could then just add artifacts such as data and code, right? So this is a classic example. And so Crossref actually, so they get these DOIs from bioarchive, and they know that because it's coming from bioarchive, that it's not an official version of record publication, but it's a preprint, right? So they have the ability to differentiate between that.
Yeah.
And in our system, like very similar. It would be like, obviously we would need to like transfer all the metadata directly over to the DeSci node. I think they do have an API for that. But then ideally we would also say from the beginning, so when this research object is being created, that this research object has its DPID, but it also gets affiliated with its DOI.
Right. Yeah, the way that I'm imagining this now is like right now in our create a node flow, it's just when you click create a node, you go straight to like a blank screen. And so you have to like do it from scratch.
Right.
But instead I imagine like you click create a node and then you have two options. One is you create it from scratch, and then one is upgrade existing research to node, and all you have to do is like paste a DOI. And then you can continue creating the node. And I think that's a very different.
Exactly.
Or it could be,
Yes. I think like having something like that, like having an option to upgrade your DOI, if this would work, it would be so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think
I would totally do that, dude. I would like just completely feed all my entire org ID record, just feed it into nodes and just say, eat it all. And then I can fill in the blanks, but yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if, let's see. Oh, but this is only for a small amount of data. Oh, low volume. Okay. Yeah, this is okay. Yeah, okay. I never thought about it this way, but it seems really important to do this now.
Yeah. I mean, this is really so this is really, really important, because otherwise we're sort of forcing people to do everything that is relevant for their career outside of our system. And we don't want that, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Because then basically our system is just an additional nuisance. Like if it doesn't make your life easier, if it doesn't help you with your career, then what the fuck is the point of it?
Yeah. Okay. I see. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. So I'd actually love to join your design like sessions that you have around these attestations. I feel like that I've come into this discussion way too late.
Well, to be clear, we like had all of these insights in a few days. Like I think it was like on Monday.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I kind of had like an
Wow.
This was like presented, or it was the last Friday or something, or
Wow.
Sunday.
Okay. Well, then kudos to your productivity of pulling it off so quickly. I mean, it looks spectacular.
I guess it's also a case where you've been thinking about this for a long time and discussing all of it, and then just getting it actually onto something really helps to clear up things.
Yeah, that's true. It felt like
It's like things suddenly start falling into place, and you suddenly get what the actual issues are, possibly more.
Yeah, it did feel a little bit like that. But I really think it's just the start. I mean, there's so many ways to like clarify it, but I feel like it's coming together. Even with the node interface, like I was really like confused about it for a long time, and now it feels like really clear about what it's for and what it's doing.
Right.
Cool.
And I mean, so the way that I'm thinking about like how this is playing out is that like in the long term, we will have many, curation communities, out of which there will be a bunch of journals, there will be some DeSci communities, there will be some people that literally just create reading lists or that just personally curate stuff that they think is valuable.
Yeah.
And that if you land on the nodes on the landing page, that the first thing you get is probably just some examples of really outstanding research, and then you select the curation community that you actually want to follow or that you want to look at.
Yeah.
And then you get this beautiful list of like this literally curated list of here's what this community thinks is relevant, and here are the things that they're particularly proud of, or the things that won awards, or whatever. And I think that, like, for me as a reader, like, would be incredibly useful and valuable. It would also, I mean, it's sort of interesting because what this would do is like it would create, if this would actually work, it would basically mean that nodes becomes basically the Schelling point for scientific communication, which like is fucking amazing. If we could pull this off, this would be so incredibly powerful. I'm not even sure if like the various journals out there, if they would want that, right? So if Elsevier would be okay with like having all their stuff on the same interface where Springer and a bunch of weirdos have their curation experience. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Also, we could remember that we could. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Leonie.
No, go ahead. I was just agreeing, so I'll go.
Yeah. Like, just remember also that like nodes doesn't necessarily have to be the only like dissemination layer. Like, you could handle the curation with your community on nodes and still post a node to your journal site.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Or create a list of nodes to your journal site. And I think that's one design principle also around like why this is a frame. Like, do you remember the whole embed a node idea?
Yeah.
So you should literally just be able to like copy this and then embed it onto your site, and it'll always stay current. So it's like an app within a website.
Yep.
That's really cool.
It is cool. It's just like it's a very different way of like interacting with research, right? So typically, like a journal or a preprint, they would have an entrance for each publication, and here you would have one like sort of box for all of them. So then you would have to go into the box and then sort of like search and browse within the box, which is like. Like,
you have to give guidelines
for some people or communities, but for journals, I'm pretty sure this is not going to work. But that's fine. I mean, that's they can display this in different ways, right? So they can still have their traditional website, and then like if they would literally be running on nodes, they could just have a link like for each article that just directly takes you to that research object, and like otherwise the website remains the same. It's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.